Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. How on earth has the Natalie Cochran case flown under the radar? It is one of the most twisted, mind bending true crime cases that I've ever seen. It's got a mysterious poisoning of a husband, like in Corey Richens' case, as she is alleged to have done. It's got grieving and estranged grandparents, like Ruth Markel in the Adelson case. And it's got a defendant who is accused of allegedly faking cancer, awarding fake scholarships, stealing from the local Shady Spring Baseball League. It's also got a complex financial Ponzi scheme that rivals anything Alec Murdaugh even thought about doing. Now, did I mention a judge found she faked having cancer and chemotherapy? So, hi, y'all. In all of my days, I have never seen or heard of a case like this one. The cases clearly deserve public notice and coverage. They deserve to be made public. But until Saturday, I had never even heard of Natalie Cochran. Normally, even if I'm not following a case yet on the channel, I've at least heard of it. And I have read a few articles. Maybe I'll be kind of following it loosely because I figure I may cover it in the future. But and I'm thinking, in the back of my mind, when we get closer, I can go into more detail. But this is actually in trial today. Jury selection started today and goes tomorrow, and then the trial begins. So Saturday, I was sort of frustrated by the fact that there really are no trials to cover, which is very normal in the legal profession for the end of November, December, January kind of range. And I found a short little piece on Court TV about a case going to trial this week. And I started looking into that. I started looking at the federal side of the case, and I just thought, how have I not heard about this case? I started researching it, and I honestly cannot believe it isn't more along the lines of what I would expect in most cases with heavy coverage. When we went to the Delphi case, there were at least 20 channels. They put placards for each of the channels covering it, and there were 20, and they're just. I looked online. I could find like one channel that kind of covered a little bit, and that's it. It's really not gotten any attention. And I said in the intro I sent out today that this is a case none of us have heard of. And you may well have. You may be better read than I am. But for me, I had never heard about it. And I can say this, even if you've been following it, you can't have been following it really closely because there's such an incredible lack of information. So I started going through the federal pleadings, and I want to introduce you to the case. And the state pleadings are not available. West Virginia doesn't make their pleadings available online. So I absolutely could not believe what I was reading. And I got me as to how this was overlooked. But let us plunge in. Today, we are going to correct that. So a special shout out to the first 5 in the chat: Katie W., Michael Lalonde, Teresa, Irish Amy, Betsy Sue, just call me Betsy. Natalie Cochran is in federal prison today. She is serving a sentence because she pled guilty to a Ponzi scheme. But today she began a jury selection in a case in which she's accused of murdering her husband, Michael, of poisoning him with an overdose of insulin. She was a pharmacist, so clearly would have understood how that would interact with his body. So I want to start back at the beginning, though, because clearly it wasn't always this way. Natalie and Michael, and let's start with just kind of who they were. They, to all appearances, had a beautiful marriage. They'd been married for 19 years. When he died, they had lovely children together. Natalie, as I said, was a pharmacist. Her attorney said this at sentencing: it wasn't too long ago when they looked like the perfect family, 2 beautiful children, promising career, nice home, active in sports, a robust circle of friends in the community. Just to go from that to where we're at now, it's really hard to wrap your head around it. So this was also not one of those families where there were strained relationships between the in-laws and the daughter-in-law. At Natalie's sentencing hearing, and we'll cover some of this in my next video on this case, Her mother-in-law, which would be Michael's mother, and Michael's stepdad, who had raised him since, I think he said he was 8 years old, they talked about how much they really loved Natalie and how they thought of her as a daughter, right up until they learned she had stolen their entire life savings and allegedly murdered their son. Now, tomorrow, or in my next video anyway, we're going to cover the sentencing hearing, and I'll let you see and read and hear what they said at the sentencing hearing. But it was very moving. But let's talk now about what went wrong. It's frankly just bizarre. In 2017, Natalie, the pharmacist, and Michael, whose job I've not been able to figure out, but which was not manufacturing arms and selling them to the military, decided that they would start two companies, which they told everyone had contracts to sell arms and military equipment to the government. It's just like, where did that come from? Their companies were TMS, which is Technology Management Solutions, LLC, and TSG, Tactical Solutions Group, LLC. I mean, it seems totally outside their wheelhouse. Did they know anything about how to find arms, how to buy them, or how to manufacture them, if that's what they were going to do? Did they know how to get government contracts? We don't really know about whether they knew any of that. But one thing they clearly did know, or at least that Natalie knew, was how to raise funds. And they certainly did raise funds primarily from friends and from their own families. Natalie got loans from banks and loans from friends, and she took every last cent her in-laws had in their savings. And according to what they said at the sentencing hearing, I do mean every cent they had. At sentencing, they talked about how terrified they were that the car would break down because they had nothing. They had no cushion, no savings at all. And of course, their son is now deceased. Now, many of her friends and family even took loans out so that they could give money to Natalie and Michael for these businesses that they had. And there will be question at this trial about whether or not Michael was involved in this or not. And repeatedly at the sentencing hearing, people got up and said, I never dealt with Michael. I only ever dealt with Natalie. So her brother testified at the sentencing hearing against her because she had stolen from him. He was one of the victims. Her parents didn't even come to the sentencing because it was going to be so awkward as to how they would deal with the question of kind of which child's side they were on. Were they on the one who was defrauded or the one who was being sentenced in the federal court for having defrauded other people? So I'm going to show you the federal charges. Let me add this to the stage, and I've got it up on the hearing. So let me swap over to the federal charges there. And I'm only going to show you the ones she pled guilty to. I mean, you can see them all, but the ones she pled guilty to were just a couple of them to, I believe it was numbers 2 and 18. I'll remember the number in just a minute, but I thought you'd be interested to know. Essentially, it sort of boiled down to its essence. What the government said was that they told everybody they were buying this equipment or manufacturing it, and they had all these contracts with the government, and they weren't buying anything, and they had no contracts with the government. The government did allege, she pled guilty to the two charges I'm going to tell you about, that she just took this money for herself, for the family, they spent it, and there was never any contract with the government. So let's take a look. These are the things she's accused of doing. And by the time this was filed, Michael was already deceased. Represented that TSG was a leading supplier to the United States Department of Defense, national security agencies, federal civilian agencies, prime contractors, and worldwide nonprofit organizations. Fraudulently solicited investments in fake government contracts supposedly awarded to either TSG or TMS for goods that defendant Natalie P. Cochran claimed either TSG or TMS were to supply to federal or state government agencies. Falsely represented that TSG and TMS acted as brokers for government contracts and that individuals could invest in individual contracts that had been awarded to TSG or TMS. Fraudulently led individual investors to believe that they were providing the capital that TSG and TMS needed to bid on and to fulfill their government contracts, which they're saying didn't exist, and that the investors could expect to receive as a return on investment a percentage of the profits that TSG and TMS would make from their government contract work. That Natalie sent text messages to potential investors about upcoming federal and state government contracts, and that defendant Natalie P. Cochran supplied existing investors with fake contract numbers that had purportedly been awarded to TSG or TMS. In fact, however, neither TSG nor TMS were ever awarded any federal government contracts, and neither company ever fulfilled or received any payment under any state or federal government contracts. So what the government is going to say is they had no money coming in from the government. They had no contracts with the government. They were never going to have any money coming in. There was nothing concrete that would provide a payment. So all they were doing was taking the money of the investors and either handing it to old investors or keeping it for themselves. Defendant Natalie P. Cochran induced at least 11 people to pay over $2.5 million for the purpose of investing in alleged government contracts purportedly awarded to TSG and TMS. Defendant Natalie P. Cochran failed to invest the investors' money as she had promised. Rather, defendant Natalie P. Cochran transferred some or all of the investors' funds to her personal and business bank accounts and then used the money for purposes other than those she had described to investors. Defendant Natalie P. Cochran used later investors' funds to pay earlier investors a partial return on their investment to lull these earlier investors into thinking that their investments were real and not fraudulent. That's, of course, the classic description of a Ponzi scheme, is where the money for the first people is returned by getting money from later people, but there's nothing there to pay everybody off. Just new money comes in, pays back the old people, and there's nothing there to reimburse the people who were later investors. And so that's what the government is alleging. When you hear the description of, when you hear the people talking in the sentencing hearing, when we go through that, it doesn't seem, frankly, like a lot of people really got much back. It seems like it was pretty much just people gave them money and they spent it. I don't know if they had plans and they thought they were going to get contracts, if they were just sure it was going to be available in the future, but there were no contracts. So the big talk that the people will describe in the sentencing hearing about all the contracts, the government is saying totally false, didn't happen, wasn't anything that actually really did occur. Okay, defendant Natalie P. Cochran applied for and did receive cash advances from at least 3 finance companies, falsely representing that TSG was a government contractor and providing bank statements showing deposits of investor funds, which she fraudulently represented to be her business sales. In other words, she said, look, there's $1 million there in the account. That's how much we've sold. It wasn't how much they had sold. It was how much the investors had given them, and that they were supposed to be responsible for using to buy product and then to further the contracts with the government. Natalie promised and pledged to the finance companies a portion of TSG's accounts receivables, which in fact consisted of investor funds to secure the cash advances. So in other words, they went to the banks or the finance companies, and Natalie said to them, look, I'm going to give you this, I'm going to give you a recompense out of the money I'm making from the government. Look how much money I'm making. Here it is in the account. And they're saying, but it wasn't money from the government. It was just money other people had put in too. The cash advances she made, used the cash advances from the finance companies to make lulling payments to investors to deceive them into believing that their investments were real. Natalie P. Cochran applied for and did receive lines of credit and loans from banks by falsely reporting her business's income to secure the loans and lines of credit, the proceeds of which she also used to make lulling payments to investors. So it was just all money that people were, this is what the allegation is, all money that people were just giving her in order for her to further the business. There was never any business. There was never any actual contract, purchase of a product, sale of a product. Instead, it was just the money that people gave her. That she created false and fraudulent excuses for her delay in paying investors their returns on their investments. You'll see that in the sentencing hearing. And that she sent investors fake emails about the status of their investments by forwarding emails that defendant Natalie P. Cochran had purportedly received from federal government employees and banking industry employees about her company's purported government contracts or pending payments from the government contracts. In fact, defendant Natalie P. Cochran used the government and banking employees' means of identification without lawful authority to mislead her investors. And there is discussion in the sentencing hearing about specific documents that were shown to people, letters that were supposed to be from various companies that were apparently faked. At least that's what the government said. Natalie P. Cochran filed a petition under Chapter 7 of the Bankruptcy Code. This is one of the two things she pled guilty to, seeking bankruptcy protection to stave off creditors. However, she did not list any of the investors as creditors. She filed a document in her bankruptcy case under penalty of perjury, which contained a material omission, failing to list her ownership interests in TSG and TMS. And I can't remember. I believe it was number 18. Let's see what number 18 is, because I want to make sure I tell you correctly which she pled guilty to. 18 through 24 were unlawful monetary transactions, and 18 was withdrawal of $37,500 from TSG CNB account held at or near Beckley, West Virginia, to purchase a 1965 Shelby Cobra. So that's specifically what it was. But the allegations in general were, and she didn't plead guilty to all of these specifically, but the allegations were that what she was doing in the bankruptcy claim, and the judge apparently had a bankruptcy background and really called her out on this, that what she said, she failed to list anything about her real income that was coming in from the companies. And he said in the hearing that he believed the reason for that was she was trying to keep the bankruptcy trustee from investigating, because the bankruptcy trustee might find out some really damaging and dangerous things. So those are the charges. Now, as I said, she pled guilty to 2 of those. Let's take a look. Now, what the judge found was that she had defrauded people and banks of $2.5 million, but that she intended to defraud even more than that, $4.85 million. She just didn't quite get away with it. Let's take a look at what the judge found. I'm just going to show you a few parts of this. And that is, okay, here I was like, what do you mean there's no page 99? Okay, here we go. As to the nature and circumstances of the offense, I find that Ms. Cochran operated an elaborate and sophisticated Ponzi scheme with the intention of defrauding all investors. And may I mention, it was, as I said, friends and family. It included her own parents, but they were not deemed to be victims. I'll talk about that maybe tomorrow. She solicited roughly $2.5 million from her friends, family, community, and financial institutions through fraudulent misrepresentations about her purported government contracting companies. This is the judge. I recognize that the defendant also falsified tax documents, presented investors with fraudulent government contracts, and created a fictitious Federal Reserve employee to induce investments. As to the history and characteristics of the defendant, I find that the defendant is a highly educated individual. She holds a doctorate in pharmacology, a master's in business administration, and an associate degree in anticoagulation management. Wow, whatever that is. The court is shaking his head as it states what the defendant has done, because I see that with her education, she could have made a significant, legitimate income. She could have done great good as a result, but it appears that she was driven to illegitimate means by greed. She used her education and her social status, as counsel noted, to do good things in the community, but also to gain the trust of friends and family, to encourage them to deplete their savings and borrow beyond their means, all the while knowing they would never see the money again. Ms. Cochran reports a good upbringing. She was raised by both parents who have been troubled by this fraudulent scheme as well. The court does not find them to constitute victims. So we'll go ahead and I'll address that. Go ahead and do it right now. I don't fully know what it was the judge was referring to. The impact of him not finding them to be victims is they're not included in the group of people that she owes money back to, because there's a finding at the end that she owes all these people money. And if she gets out after she was sentenced, in this case, to 11 years and 3 months, the maximum for what she pled guilty to, and if she gets out at 85% of that from federal court, if she's not convicted of the murder charge, then when she gets out, she's supposed to get a job in her pharmacology field, and she's supposed to begin paying everybody back. That won't include her parents. I don't know whether that's because I don't know why. Maybe she paid them some money back and she didn't pay other people money back. But in any event, that was the judge's finding. And the defendant describes her mental health as good and notes a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder following the death of her husband. The court also recognizes that the defendant reports suffering from physical and emotional abuse during her marriage. As to her physical health, the court notes that Ms. Cochran reports suffering from heart conditions and leukopenia. I also note the victim impact statements note that Ms. Cochran lied about a cancer diagnosis and about receiving chemotherapy and radiation. That's wow. She told her victims or others things like, can't come today, too sick from chemo. And sorry for the late response, this radiation treatment makes me tired. So she said those things to her victims to explain why she couldn't show up, or couldn't explain, for example, maybe where their money was, couldn't have a meeting about that. She used, he's saying, the chemotherapy, the radiation as an excuse, and she didn't even have cancer. The court goes on to say that's extremely manipulative and demonstrates the lengths to which she would have these victims surrender further funds to her. And it's extremely troubling given all the individuals who are suffering with that type of diagnosis. And to use that once again demonstrates the complex and unusually sinister course of conduct that she is engaged in. But that's not the only kind of wild outlying thing that he's going to go on to talk about. I wanted to mention and note, as well as part of my findings on the factors, the comment made by Donna Bolt, that is the mother of Michael, who was grief-stricken, testifying she has no idea how she will be able to pay some of her bills as a result of the offense. Another in-law, Ed Bolt, again, both of whom had a great trust in the defendant and who loved her, was aghast when he recalled her saying that she wanted the Bolts to be comfortable in their retirement, knowing all the while that her scheme would destroy them financially. It is frankly quite shocking. That's the court talking still. And then the next one is apparently one of the things that they talked about, and thank you, Carrie and Luke's channel. I really appreciate that. One of the things that they talked about was at the sentencing earlier in this sentencing hearing. This is the transcript from the sentencing hearing. One of the things they talked about was apparently She gave out scholarships to students and told them they were going to get, as I understood it from one of the comments, a free ride. They'd be going to college for free. So she would be at she would be at the school presenting this. Their parents would be there. Everyone would be excited. And there were no scholarships to be given. There was no money. There was no money set aside. There were no scholarships. We don't know a lot about this. All I'm basing this on is the comments made at the sentencing hearing. But the in-laws said they even went to one of these, and then they were humiliated later to learn that this was just fake. And the judge's comment, the scholarship disappointments are in a category of their own. Very little else needs to be said in that regard, because there were no scholarships, apparently. There were just promises of scholarships that didn't actually appear. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what she said in response at the sentencing hearing. You will probably not be totally shocked to learn that she blamed Michael, her husband. He's dead, obviously. The state says she killed him using insulin. That's the case that is going to trial. So we'll take a look at a little bit, just a little bit of what she said. I'm not going to cover it all. She talked for a little while. And she said, for years before Michael passed, life had been more than difficult for me and the children, and now for the victims as well. When Michael began taking steroids and using illicit supplements, he was using far and above the normal doses and processing controversial alternative therapies. It became his addiction. Now, I want you to notice, look right here. See where it says the defendant? That's where she starts talking. So she's just 2 paragraphs in. She hits the 3rd paragraph. She says, I offer no excuses. That's a sentence before. I offer no excuses, only sincere apologies and deep regret. Ideally, at a sentencing hearing, that's a point at which the defendant takes a seat. However, her very next sentence is about Michael and about how he took steroids, he used illicit supplements, he became addicted. The steroid use turned him into a completely different person. He would be loving one minute to taking a sledgehammer to our furniture the next. He became physically and mentally abusive to us. Life became, for the children and I, a constant state of don't make Mike mad. We were ostracized and cut off from our families and friends, and we were only allowed to interact with them or text them when he was present. We begged him to stop the drugs. People in this very room today tried to intervene as well, but to no avail. Life became hell for us, and to protect the kids, I started to get into a situation where I would always give in to him. I would never question him, and I would appease him at every turn. If Mike wasn't happy, no one in the house was allowed to be. Notice how none of this is accepting responsibility. None of this is saying, I acknowledge that I did wrong. I would like to make up for it. All of this is about Michael and his role. This is going to be most likely a defense she's going to give in the trial that is about to take place in West Virginia. I'm assuming she's going to suggest that under the influence of drugs, he overdosed somehow with insulin. I'm not really sure how that would correlate, but that's my guess based on what she says here. We begged him to stop the drugs. People in this very room today tried to intervene as well, but to no avail. Life became hell for us, and to protect the kids, I started to get into a situation where I would always give in to him. I would never question him, and I would appease him at every turn. If Mike wasn't happy, no one in the house was allowed to be. Sorry, I already read that. What did make him happy was money, and when Mike had money, money made him happy. It was just enough, was never enough. Let me reread that. It was just enough, was never enough. When we went to buy his boat that he had his heart set on, he wanted 3 and not 1. The renovations to our home were largely spent on an extra garage for his sports car. All of the toys and items that were seized from our house and not returned by the police were his, with the exception of a couple of someone else's things. He even took helicopter lessons before he could even begin to afford one. I acknowledge I received jewelry from him in fall of 2018. It was a $14,000 pair of earrings, according to a receipt the government submitted. But that was his way of apologizing to me for physically hurting me by trying to run me over with his truck. Mike was my everything. He was my husband of 19 years. We've been together since we were 17. He was my best friend, and he was the father of my children. I've never wanted to publicly criticize him or tarnish his memory, and that's why the children and I have suffered in the quiet and in silence until now. She goes on to say she wants to pay everybody back. She wants to work. She wants to do that. And then she says, I love my family and friends and am mortified that any of them and their loved ones were hurt or have ill will towards me. Most of you in this room have known me for decades. You know the person I've always been prior to this. I've never even had a speeding ticket. In fact, my best friend, Chris's wife, Jennifer Davis, Chris testified, once told the Register Herald I was their guardian angel. I would give anything for any of you. Since I was 15, I've worked hard. I've had 3 jobs in college at one time. I dedicated countless hours to community service and church activities. I've lost my husband. I've lost my family, my friends, my reputation, and worst of all, my Christian testimony. Every day I wish Mike were here. I wish he hadn't left me to deal with this alone. I wish that he had never started the drugs. I wish we could turn back the clock. But even though the last few years were so difficult, the kids and I miss him every day, and we talk about him. We would give anything to have him back. We focus on the good memories, and I try to impress upon them that the man he became was just the drugs and that he never stopped loving them. So let me go ahead and pull that out, and we'll talk a little bit more about the case. So as you can see, she seems to be talking a lot about Michael and suggesting that he took drugs. I don't know how that's going to play into her defense, but I would think that it would be part of it. All of the financial information, or at least a good part of it, is going to come in at her criminal trial for murder. The judge said he's going to allow that to come in evidence. The prosecution is claiming that it is related to the motive, that the reason she murdered him was that she alone had engaged in the Ponzi scheme, and he either had just found out or was about to find out. And so she had to get him out of the way. He was upset, perhaps, that his parents were losing everything in this Ponzi scheme. So according to a local newspaper article, on the 6th of February in 2019, Natalie and Michael were scheduled to take a charter flight to Virginia. They were going to meet with the Bank of America to discuss something about their account. Details, I don't know. At 6:30 a.m., Natalie texted the pilot to say, we've got to cancel. And she said that Michael and she were sick. But text messages, according to what the newspaper article says, show that Michael wasn't really happy about that cancellation. He wanted to reschedule. He even offered to just go on to the meeting with an attorney friend of theirs if she wasn't feeling well enough to go. So that same day, in some later text messages, Natalie tells Michael that she went to the doctor and she got promethazine and some other unidentified medications for Michael. And apparently promethazine is an antihistamine. It's supposed to help you with allergies or motion sickness, nausea. It also has a sedative effect. It can be used to treat cold or flu symptoms. So Natalie also texted a friend saying that Michael and she had the flu and that Natalie was suffering side effects of radiation and chemotherapy for cancer, and that her doctor had prescribed her insulin, which she had not yet purchased. There is apparently a bottle or vial of insulin that was found in a quote, hidden in Natalie's refrigerator. Now, I will say that you could probably claim a lot of things in my refrigerator are hidden right now. Pretty much everything in the back you could argue was hidden. So I don't know what exactly that means, hidden in the refrigerator. And I don't know for sure whether it was empty or full, but that was what the argument was that this vial was connected to the murder. Initially, Michael, there was an autopsy, and I've read articles that said either 2 or 3 times that he was exhumed for more testing. That means the body is taken out of the burial and is looked at again by medical personnel. And in this particular case, it was looked at least twice and maybe 3 times. And on the 3rd time, there was initially a murder charge against Natalie that was dismissed. And the prosecutor said they wanted to do another exhumation. They wanted to look at the body again. They did, and they found this really high level of insulin. And that's when from that point on, they recharged her. And that's the case that we're looking at right now, is this case. So the prosecutor is saying they believe that all this financial evidence is part of the motive why she would murder her husband. That's sort of similar to in Alec Murdaugh, where the prosecution argued that the financial motive gave them a reason to put in all the financial information. In this particular case, as in that case, the judge has found it to be included. He does believe that it's relevant. And I don't know how far they'll get with that particular motive. It doesn't, given that Michael was actually apparently a co-owner of these 2 companies, I don't know if they're going to be able to successfully argue that he didn't know about what was happening, but I can see it being, with all the stress that was going on, being part and parcel of their relationship and maybe a real stress point for that reason as well. So I really, honestly, with a case like this, would have expected dozens of YouTube videos on this. It is it's moving into trial right now. Jury selection has begun. They were only bringing in 2 groups of 80 jurors, which seems small to me for it's a community. I think there are like 16,000 people in Beckley, West Virginia. And so you would think a lot of people would know witnesses or would know the defendant or perhaps the deceased. So trial will begin as soon as they finish up the jury selection, which was supposed to take a couple of days. And in terms of the coverage, I don't know whether Court TV is going to do any kind of TV coverage. If they don't, then it's going to be really hard to get significant amount of information about it. I honestly, after researching it, I've actually considered going to West Virginia to cover the case, because I am guessing it's going to be really hard to get information about it. If Court TV televises it, that will make it really much easier. Obviously, we can all follow it then and talk about it on a regular basis in the evening. So I would like your opinion. What do you think? Are you very, very interested in the case? Moderately interested? Not interested? Would you let me know in the comments? It will really help me sort of analyze my time, what I should do, what you would like to hear about. I would appreciate that. Okay, and I'll answer a few questions. I'll go over into the chat, and if you would put the question marks at the beginning, it will really help me to spot your questions in the chat. So I see a couple of strong interested. I see a question. How was your weekend, says Michael. It was good. It was good. I did do a lot of looking at this case because I was so intrigued by this case and reading through the federal files and thinking, where has this case been? Why is it not being talked about all the time? This is crazy. There's a lot to it. I would like to know a lot more about the allegations that she stole from the Little League and what on earth was going on with that. That seems truly appalling, but there's no information. So I don't know how significant it was or even if there's real evidence about it, but it certainly sounds crazy. Maria asked, did your glasses finally arrive? These are the new reading computer glasses. So yes, they did. And the other one is, I have to go pick it up. I ordered from Costco. So I've got to go pick that up and get my next, that's for my regular walking around glasses. Love when you go to trial, Weezer said. It's fun for me too. I enjoy it as well. Yeah, where is the local person so invested in the case that they're doing all of this research and they are doing regular coverage over it and making sure that the public knows about it. It just seems like there would be not just one, but many people. Delphi is a tiny community, and look at all the people who were regularly blogging and posting about that for years and years. I'm just very, very surprised. Chinny, do you ever wear your hair up? Not really. I don't. Hair questions tonight. It's always funny to me when y'all do that. All right, Lee, Klaus von Bülow was charged with trying to murder the socialite Sonny von Bülow via insulin overdose. I remember that. I remember that that's the case. I don't think I've ever covered one that was insulin. The Corey Richens one wasn't insulin. It was, what was the drug in the Moscow Mule? I'm forgetting what drug she purchased. It was alleged to have purchased. That case obviously is going to trial in April. But anyway, I have definitely thought about this. So I would have to have a lot of very interested. I see a lot of people. This case is fascinating. So, okay, I'll definitely get from the mods. Speaking of which, thank you so much to Marlon, to Mama Pinks, and to Denisepelton. But I'll get from them sort of the read on where y'all super interested in it. Sunset Gazing asking, don't people ever learn? This reminds me of Ken Lay of Enron and other con women, altruistic on the one hand while robbing blind with the other hand. Yeah, and this one, I guess okay, coherent sentence here, Lee. All right, the sentencing hearing, the statement of the mother-in-law is just something that nearly brings you to tears. It is, she's just destroyed by this. Her son is killed. Her daughter-in-law, whom she loved, supposedly and allegedly killed him. They stole all her money and she gave it to them because she loved them and she trusted them. And now she doesn't get to see her grandkids. It's just, oh my gosh, it's so overwhelming. Everything. She lost everything. And it's really, it was very powerful. Tracy saying, let's do some evening coverage again. Delphi coverage was amazing. I'm glad you like that. Connie Presley, this is crazy. I'm interested. People like this make me not trust anyone. I know it is really worrisome, isn't it? I mean, you should hear the people. It isn't like she defrauded 150 people and she hardly knew them. These are people who were her really close friends and family. Wow. All right. I'm looking for any more questions. Fentanyl. Thank you. I have forgotten. I was like, okay, what is the Corey Richens drug? Yes. Thank you. Fentanyl. Okay. Well, I think we've covered it for tonight. I will be doing a video. I don't know how quickly. I may go tomorrow night, maybe Wednesday night. It will depend on whether or not I decide I'm going to go to the trial. But as far as I'm going to cover that sentencing hearing because you are really going to want to hear what the family members had to say. It is very moving. So I will see you soon and let me know what you think about this case.